March 9th, 1945. A night when the sky above Japan stopped being sky and became a weapon. From the runways of Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, 325 B-29 Superfortresses rise one by one into the fading light. No tight formations, no high-altitude precision runs. Only single aircraft, flying low, heavy, and stripped for one purpose. Inside their bomb bays lie the quiet shape of a new kind of fire. Tokyo waits below them, a city of wooden homes, narrow alleys and families who believe tonight will be like every raid before it. A siren, some distance, a few bombs, then silence. But this night is different. The first Pathfinder aircraft crosses the coastline at 12:08 a.m. It drops a burning X onto the center of Shitamachi --. An X so bright it carves open the darkness for miles. Then from the black sky, the rain begins. Not water, fire. Within minutes, thousands of ignition points spread across Honjo, Asakusa, and Fukagawa. Winds push the flames faster than people can run. The heat rises above 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Entire blocks ignite in seconds. For those on the ground, the night no longer has direction. Only sound, heat, and the instinct to survive for one more breath. And for the crews above, the city they see beneath them will not be the same when they return. Because in the next few hours, Tokyo will endure the deadliest air raid in human history. A firestorm so vast that it will erase neighborhoods, reshape the war, and leave silence in its wake. This is the night the capital of an empire turned into a sea of fire. March 9th, 1945. As the last colors of sunset faded over the Marianas, the runways of Guam, Saipan, and Tinian came alive with movement. Ground crews rushed along the concrete, checking engines, fuel lines, and bomb shackles under the bellies of 325 B-29 Superfortresses. These aircraft were not flying in formation tonight. They would go one by one, low, heavy, and alone. Inside each bomber lay 1,520 M69 incendiary bomblets. Small metal tubes filled with jellied gasoline that would burn hotter than anything Tokyo had ever seen. Major General Curtis LeMay had changed everything. Months of high-altitude raids had failed. Bombs drifted in the jet stream. Engines overheated. Cloud cover hid targets. Night fighters slipped through gaps. Now LeMay ordered the unthinkable. Strip off most defensive guns. Load the bomb bays to maximum weight. Fly at 5,000 to 7,000 feet instead of 30,000. Attack at night. Bomb individually, not in formation. It was a gamble that would change the course of the war. Below the distant horizon, the first B-29 lifted off from Guam's North Field at 17:35. Its engines roared like hammer blows across the field. Crews knew that the moment they left the runway, they were stepping into a mission that could define the entire Pacific Air Campaign. Tokyo, densely packed with wooden homes, narrow alleys, and 750,000 civilians, waited ahead. But no one in the city yet understood what the night sky would bring. For decades, Tokyo had been a city built of wood, houses made of cedar and pine, sliding paper doors, roofs that leaned over narrow lanes, neighborhoods woven together tighter than fabric. Beautiful, traditional, fragile. American planners studied every detail: maps, pre-war architectural drawings, police reports, handmade surveys of cottage industries. They knew that in Asakusa, Honjo, and Fukagawa, thousands of small workshops sat inside family homes, producing vital parts for Japan's military. They knew the alleys were so tight that fire could leap across them in seconds. They knew the winds often blew strong across the city at night, and they chose March 9th precisely for that reason. Weather forecasts called for strong surface winds, dry air, clear visibility, perfect conditions for fire to spread, and impossible conditions for firefighters to stop it. Tokyo had fewer than 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns, most without radar, most without proper ammunition. They could not track low-flying bombers in darkness. Night fighters were even fewer. J-1N Gekkos, hastily converted. Kai-45, Toryu twin engines. Pilots with minimal night training, little fuel, little hope. Tokyo was a city waiting for disaster, and it didn't know it. Hours after takeoff, the B-29s approached Japan's coast. They saw Mount Fuji rising in the moonlight, a silent tower guiding them toward the capital. At 12:08 a.m., the first Pathfinder aircraft reached Tokyo. It dropped 47 napalm markers that burst into an enormous burning X across Shitamachi. The flames lit the maze of wooden homes below, marking the target for hundreds of bombers still on the way. Civilians woke to the sound of sirens, but many stayed inside. They had endured raids before, high altitude, scattered bombs, limited damage. Tonight, they would discover this was nothing like those raids. Minutes later, the main wave arrived. As the bomb bay doors opened, metallic cylinders glinted in the firelight below. Then the sky began releasing thousands of M69 bomblets, each separating, spinning, and falling into the heart of the city. When they hit the ground, they waited. 3 to 5 seconds, long enough to settle sideways, long enough to bury themselves under debris. Then the white phosphorus ignited. Flaming napalm shot out in multiple directions, adhering to walls, floors, doors, and human skin. Each cluster created dozens of ignition points. Hundreds of clusters created thousands. Tokyo began to burn in patterns that no fire department on Earth could stop. Within minutes, fires merged. Winds accelerated. A firestorm, the most feared phenomenon of urban warfare, started to form. On the ground, people heard a new sound, not explosions. A deep, continuous roar. One survivor described it as the sound of the air itself being eaten. Above them, B-29 crews flew through rising hot air that shook their aircraft violently. Some were pushed upward by sudden blasts of heat, others were rocked sideways by swirling fire columns. The city below was no longer a grid of streets. It was a single expanding mass of flame. Tokyo had begun its descent into hell. Throughout the early hours of March 10th, the scale of destruction grew beyond anything American planners had imagined. The M69 performed exactly as designed. Wooden homes ignited in seconds. Cottage industries vanished. Entire blocks collapsed inward. Tokyo firefighters fought as best they could, but water lines burst. Pumps failed. Wind drove flames faster than trucks could move. By the time the last B-29 turned back toward the Marianas, Tokyo was no longer a city of streets and districts. It was a burning ocean. What began as a strategic shift, an experiment in low-altitude incendiary bombing, had become the single deadliest air raid in human history. The night was only beginning. The consequences would echo far beyond Tokyo. Into the future of warfare, into the decisions that shaped the final months of World War II, and into the memories of those who lived through the fire. This was the final calm before the true chaos. This was the prelude to the hell that awaited below. 2 a.m., the first bombs had already fallen, but Tokyo still did not understand what was happening. People stepped outside expecting another high-altitude raid. Some smoke, some damage, then silence. Instead, they saw the sky reflecting red off the roofs of Honjo and Asakusa. From above, B-29 crews watched the city ignite like a vast pattern of kindling. The wooden homes, so tightly packed they touched one another, burned as if they had waited for this night their entire existence. One tail gunner later wrote, "It wasn't a city catching fire. It was a single flame pretending to be a city." Inside Tokyo, the first wave of panic began. Families grabbed children. Neighbors shouted to each other. Many still didn't run. They believed the fire would stay in one district. They were wrong. The wind took the flames and carried them across alleys, over rooftops, and straight through entire blocks. At street level, fire did not fall from the sky. It arrived from every direction. Meanwhile, above the flames, the M69 bomblets continued to scatter. Thousands of small metal tubes glinting in the firelight as they spun downward. Each was just 6 pounds. Each carried only a small amount of napalm. Each was insignificant, until hundreds of thousands fell at once. In minutes, Tokyo became a living furnace. Shitamachi, the working-class heart of Tokyo, was the first to disappear. The houses made of cedar and pine ignited at the slightest touch of burning napalm. The alleys acted like vents, turning narrow streets into channels of flame. Rooftops collapsed inward. Smoke poured out through every opening. People ran, but the fire ran faster. A survivor recalled, "The flames chased us like something alive. The wind grew stronger, not natural wind, wind created by fire. This was the beginning of a firestorm, a monstrous cycle where flames consumed oxygen, pulled in fresh air, and created hurricane-like conditions. The temperature on the ground rose above 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The air itself became lethal. Those who inhaled the superheated smoke collapsed instantly. Tokyo's firefighters, poorly equipped and overwhelmingly outnumbered, tried to stand their ground. They dragged hoses across melting streets, only for the water to evaporate before reaching the flames. Their trucks caught fire. Their uniforms ignited. Many died at their posts. Civilians fled toward the Sumida River. Parents carried children. Children carried younger siblings. But by the time they reached the riverbanks, thousands were already gathered there, trapped between fire and water. The river, thick with soot and burning debris, was no refuge. People jumped in and never resurfaced. One woman later said, "The water was black and boiling. It swallowed entire families. On the bridges, chaos erupted. Crowds crushed forward. People fell. Others were pushed. Lantern posts glowed red from the heat. The firestorm roared louder. It was now a living phenomenon, feeding on the city itself. Inside the firestorm, people struggled to breathe. Not because of smoke, but because the fire had consumed the oxygen around them. Some survivors described fainting for a moment, then waking on the ground, unsure how they survived. Others remembered the world narrowing into heat, wind, darkness, panic. A mother holding her baby felt her child's clothes ignite. She jumped into a ditch, smothering the flames with her own body. She survived. The baby did not. In Honjo, a crowd of hundreds fled toward a school designated as an emergency shelter. By the time they arrived, the building was glowing. Its wooden beams burned from the inside. Moments later, the roof collapsed, trapping everyone in a single burst of flame. Investigators found nothing recognizable. Only melted metal, charred soil, and fragments of pottery. Across the city, people tried to take shelter in shallow dugouts known as bogo. But napalm dripped through cracks. Smoke filled the enclosed space. Many suffocated before realizing they were trapped. Above them, B-29 crews felt the turbulence created by rising heat columns. Entire aircraft were lifted hundreds of feet. Others shuddered violently as the winds twisted around them. One pilot wrote, "It felt like flying over an open volcano." For the first time in the war, American crews witnessed fire behaving like a living force. Even from 6,000 feet up, the heat reached them. Below, Tokyo had lost all sense of direction. People ran without knowing where they were. Homes collapsed, streets disintegrated, landmarks vanished. The city was no longer a city, just a glowing expanse of fire and smoke. Around 2:30 a.m., the firestorm reached maximum intensity. It consumed everything: homes, schools, temples, bridges, entire neighborhoods. At its peak, the firestorm generated winds strong enough to pull people off their feet. Survivors described being thrown backward, stumbling as flaming debris flew past them. Bodies lay along streets that no longer looked like streets, just corridors of ash. In some places, victims were found in groups, fused together by the heat. As the B-29s turned away from Tokyo, some crews looked back through small windows. They saw not a city, but a circular wall of flame stretching miles wide, pulsing in the darkness. One bombardier wrote, "It looked like the earth had opened and swallowed Tokyo." The Americans flew home in near silence. Many would never forget the sight. On the ground, the fire continued to burn until almost dawn. Not because fuel remained, but because the heat was too intense for anyone to approach. By sunrise, the firestorm had spent itself. It had devoured all it could. Tokyo was a flattened landscape of black ash, charred beams, and the faint outlines of what once was. More than 100,000 people were gone. 1 million were homeless. Shitamachi no longer existed. The turning point had come, not just for Tokyo but for the war itself. From this night on, Japan understood that the air above them could not be defended. And America understood the devastating power of incendiary warfare. The fire had done more than destroy a city. It had changed the course of the Pacific War. 2 a.m., Tokyo was no longer a city. It was a landscape of fire, wind, and human voices fading into the roar of the inferno. People stepped outside expecting explosions. Instead, they felt heat that wrapped itself around their skin, their lungs, their eyes, heat that made the world bend and flicker like something unreal. The wooden homes of Shitamachi, stacked so close they shared walls, erupted as if struck by lightning. Napalm clung to beams, floors, sliding doors, and paper windows. The flames moved with impossible speed, leaping from one rooftop to the next. One survivor said, "I heard the fire breathing. It wasn't sound. It was hunger." M69s didn't explode like normal bombs. They spread, sprayed, rolled, and burned along the ground. They turned every object into fuel: signs, tatami mats, wooden sandals, door frames, and cabinets. Even the air seemed to glow from within. Parents grabbed children. Children grabbed younger siblings. Families ran toward streets they had known their entire lives, only to find that those streets were gone, replaced by walls of smoke and wind. The firestorm had begun, and Tokyo had entered a night it would never escape. Tens of thousands sprinted toward Kototoi Bridge, believing the opposite bank would save them. But the wind pushed fire from both sides, forming a tunnel of heat. People collapsed before reaching the center. Many were trampled as crowds surged forward blindly. Lantern posts glowed red. The iron rails burned to the touch. Bodies fell into heaps, fused together by the heat. When recovery teams arrived after the war, they found bones melted into the pavement. Hundreds fled to Kikukawa Elementary School, marked as a safe zone in civil defense maps. But when Firestorm 1 slammed into the building, it ignited from the roof downward. The wooden frame burned like dry leaves. The playground became a cauldron of swirling heat. Investigators found no recognizable remains, only collapsed beams, warped metal, and fragments of burned belongings from children. Temples had saved lives during earthquakes, floods, and previous air raids. But this night, they betrayed those who entered. Their wide halls filled with smoke. Their giant roofs caught fire in minutes. And when the rafters collapsed, entire families perished together. At a temple in Honjo, more than 200 people died in one instant. Thousands reached the water's edge with relief until they saw the river. The surface was covered in burning debris. The water boiled near the shore. People jumped in, only to sink beneath waves of soot and ash. One witness later said, "It didn't feel like water anymore. It felt like a black, heavy liquid that pulled us down." In alleyways too narrow for wind to escape, the flames intensified. Superheated, roaring, unstoppable. People who entered these alleys died in seconds. The fire consumed oxygen so quickly that many collapsed before flames reached them. Some investigators later called these places corridors of instant death. Yoshiko fled with her 13-month-old daughter, her parents, and her sister. "Fire fell like heavy rain," she said later. As they reached the river, debris rained from the sky. Her father shoved her and the baby into the water, pushing them toward safety. Her mother, father, and sister did not survive. The river saved her life. But it took everything else. A 12-year-old boy held his brother's hand as crowds surged down the street. A violent gust separated them. He turned. He screamed. But the wind carried his voice away. By morning, nothing of his neighborhood remained. One firefighter wrote, "We ran toward every fire, but each fire was already bigger than we were." He described children huddling in corners, elderly people unable to move, entire blocks collapsing in front of him. His hose melted in his hands. He survived. Most of his crew did not. She spent hours inside a shallow dugout, splashing water on herself to stay conscious. When she emerged, the world had changed. Her home was gone. Her street, gone. The businesses she had known her entire life. Nothing but ash. She said, "I didn't think I had survived a bombing. I thought I had woken in a place with no name." As B-29s turned for home, many crews looked back at Tokyo. They saw a circular wall of flame, so large it didn't look real. Some refused to speak during the return flight. Others stared silently out their windows. One gunner later wrote, "I believed we were ending the war. I didn't know we were creating memories I'd never escape." By 4:30 a.m., the fire began to die. Not because firefighters stopped it, but because nothing was left to burn. People walked across a plain of ash. Street lines had vanished. Homes had been erased. Entire blocks were unrecognizable. Some carried bundles they believed were the remains of loved ones. Others searched for landmarks that no longer existed. In many districts, so many people had died that officials stopped counting. They simply wrote, "No survivors." Parents searched for children. Children searched for parents. Most found nothing at all. Tokyo had become a city of unmarked graves. The fire killed fast, but the silence that followed killed slowly. American airmen carried their guilt. Japanese civilians carried their grief. Neither side left the night unchanged. One pilot confessed, "I know why we did it," but knowing doesn't make it easier. One survivor whispered, "I don't know who was right or wrong. I only know my city disappeared." When dawn broke over Tokyo, the firestorm ended. But the true hell was only beginning. It lived in the silence, in the ashes beneath people's feet, and in the memory of a city that had endured the deadliest night in human history. This is where the reflection begins. This is where the world must decide what it learned from the fire. March 10th, 1945. The first sunlight of the morning did not shine in gold. It broke through a thick, hovering layer of smoke that still clung to the sky above Tokyo, bending the light into a dull, distorted glow, as if the sun were rising behind a sheet of soot-covered glass. What it revealed was not a city waking up, but a landscape scraped down to its bones. Charred walls, blackened timber posts glowing faintly. Streets erased, neighborhoods flattened into one endless dark plain stretching to the horizon. A survivor later said, "I thought the sun hadn't risen." But it had. The light just wasn't light anymore. When the morning wind passed through the ruins, the ash lifted gently like gray snow, and Tokyo showed the new shape of itself, a flat black ocean of rubble and silence. People crawled out of shelters in shallow dugouts and found no streets to navigate, no houses to recognize, and no signboards, and no trees, no bridge railings, no direction. A man who lived his entire life in Honjo said, "We didn't know where we were standing, even though it was the place where we were born." They searched for their families, but found only small piles of ash, warped metal, bent by heat, cracked stone walls, skeletons piled together, silhouettes of human bodies burned into the ground when the flames swept over. There was no starting point, no address, no way to match a body with a name, no face left to recognize. Tokyo had become a place where the living searched for the dead and found only silence. The silence that morning was so deep that some survivors believed they'd lost their hearing. But then they heard the faint cracking of metal contracting as it cooled, wooden beams still smoldering, ashes crunching beneath their bare feet, the wind passing through hollowed door frames, the soft hiss of small fires dying out. It was the sound of a city that had died, but whose remains were still breathing out their final warmth. A firefighter wrote, "We walked through what had once been the most crowded part of Tokyo, but not a single voice. I had never heard a silence that heavy. From Sumida to Asakusa, from Honjo to Fukagawa, people walked like shadows. Some carried ashes in their sleeves. Some dragged burnt bodies of loved ones they could not abandon. Some walked without knowing where they were going. A woman clutching a small wooden box told a rescue team, 'This is my home.' Inside the box was nothing but gray ash mixed with splinters of charred wood. No one knew what to tell her. Officials attempted to record. Houses destroyed, districts erased, missing persons, identifiable remains. But the numbers collapsed immediately. In Sumida alone, rescue workers found 200 bodies in a single shelter, 300 in a large ash mound by a temple, hundreds by bridges and riverbanks. Many bodies had no shape left. Many skeletons had fused together under the heat. One official finally wrote in frustration, "We cannot count this. We simply record. This area, no surviving residents." It was the only classification that made sense. After the night of March 9th to 10th, Japan's military leadership understood a truth they had avoided for months. Their defense of the capital had failed. Radar malfunctioned. Anti-aircraft guns could not track low-flying B-29s. Night fighters lacked fuel, parts, and trained pilots. Civil defense plans existed only on paper. Fire brigades were overwhelmed in minutes. Shelters protected almost no one. A Japanese general wrote bluntly in a confidential report, "We no longer possess the ability to defend the imperial capital." It was the first time Japan formally acknowledged that they could not shield their population from American air power. Only 10 days after Tokyo burned, the next wave began. Nagoya, twice. Osaka, Kobe. Each raid ignited new swaths of cities. People began reacting not with fear, but with resignation. Survivors recalled hearing neighbors mutter, "Ah, it's them again." A cold, exhausted sentence, written in dozens of diaries. People no longer ran. They no longer screamed. Many no longer rushed for shelters. Fatigue had become the second weapon of the war. After the Tokyo firestorm, Japan faced food shortages, a housing crisis, a medical system in ruin, crippling fuel scarcity, transportation nearly frozen. People slept on bare ground under makeshift metal sheets inside half-burned school buildings. One man wrote, "We did not eat to be full. We ate to avoid dying." Children searched for edible weeds. Families boiled tree bark. Elderly people fainted in ration lines. Tokyo was not simply burned, it was starved. More than 50% of Tokyo's cottage industries were destroyed. These were not factories with smokestacks. They were tiny workshops inside residential neighborhoods. The backbone of Japan's wartime production, they produced aircraft parts, electrical components, precision instrument pieces, gearboxes, fittings for larger factories. When the neighborhoods burned, so did the workers, craftsmen, machinists, tool makers, electrical specialists. Many died, many fled, many had no homes to return to. Japan lost not only facilities, but skill, the kind that could not be rebuilt quickly. This was a crippling blow to Japan's ability to continue the war. No officer dared speak the words aloud, but every civilian knew Japan had already lost. Smoke from the Tokyo raid hung over the capital for days. Every time someone looked up, they saw not clouds, but the future of the war evaporating like ash. Diaries from March and April share a single emotion, not fear, but inevitability. A mother wrote, "The empire is shrinking. Every night, a new piece turns to smoke." People did not wait for an announcement. They felt the defeat in their bones. Doi Jai Lafen Bon Si, English version, 11 labs ready. Jujung Tone documentary Lan, Sao Lian Mahvoy Bon, A Gen Bon B. The B-29 crews returned to Guam, Saipan, and Tinian in silence, exhaustion, psychological shock. Unofficial reports described airmen unable to sleep, gunners requesting reassignment, crew chiefs shaken by the smell of smoke clinging to the aircraft's skin, pilots staring at the floor during debriefings, navigators refusing to talk for days. One airman wrote about watching Tokyo burn below him. "I knew it was war, but I couldn't stop wondering how many people were looking up at my plane for the last time." A question without an answer, and one that followed many of them long after the war. Hiroshima and Nagasaki would one day have memorials. Tokyo had nothing. No monuments, no plaques, no official graves, not even a complete list of the dead. Families created their own private memorials in the alley corners, empty lots beside bridges behind homes. Often the memorial was nothing more than a stone, a flower, a stick of incense, a child's ribbon tied to a post. A woman searching for her mother said, "We do not know where they are. They may be beneath our feet. They may be somewhere in the city. They may be in the wind." Tokyo mourned in silence because there was nothing else left. Before the raid, the nation was told to endure, persevere, fight, sacrifice, stay loyal to the emperor. Those messages collapsed the moment people saw children burned in their mother's arms, grandparents lying in alleys, entire neighborhoods erased in hours, schools without students, temples without survivors. A school teacher wrote, "How do I teach courage? When so many of my students are gone, no propaganda could cover the truth." The firestorm had broken something deeper than buildings. After the war, Tokyo rebuilt rapidly. Steel beams rose, concrete foundations spread, new avenues replaced winding alleys, subways carved deeper into the earth. But beneath all of it were ashes of families, burned belongings, unmarked bones, Fragments of childhood toys, metal buckles fused by heat. In the 1960s and 1970s, construction workers digging subway tunnels and foundations uncovered human skeletons at melted coins, scorched pottery, a child's bracelet, fused rosary beads. No names, no records, no answers. Tokyo lived on top of a graveyard without markers, a city rebuilt over its own dead. Most survivors chose not to speak. Not because they forgot, but because remembering required reliving the night. Many had lost entire families, children or friends, the streets of their childhood, the identity of the neighborhoods where they once belonged. A woman said, "I wanted to forget, but every time I saw smoke, I remembered." Another said, "I could not tell my grandchildren. There are no words for that night." Silence became the only language the survivors could endure. A silence that lasted decades. Not Hiroshima, not Nagasaki. It was Tokyo that suffered the deadliest single air raid in human history, the least discussed tragedy of the war, the catastrophe most often forgotten. The destruction revealed a painful truth. A city can vanish in one night. A nation can lose part of its soul. What burned on March 10th was not only Tokyo's neighborhoods, but humanity's belief in the limits of modern war. The United States used scientific models of Japanese homes built in Utah, industrial output capable of producing 50,000 tons of incendiaries a month, meteorological data to choose nights of strong winds, chemical research to perfect the M69, mass production to sustain the campaign. Japan relied on spirited tradition, loyalty, resolve. One side had modern science, the other had courage. The outcome was clear, science prevailed. But the victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like a warning. Looking back, it becomes clear. No one truly won the night Tokyo burned. The Americans won strategically, but carried the burden of what they had seen. The Japanese lost militarily, but bore the grief of what they had suffered. 100,000 lives vanished within hours. Their ashes mixed with the soil where Tokyo stands today. A historian said, "Tokyo was not defeated. Tokyo was erased. The firestorm was not a battle. It was an erasure, one that left no clear place for victory." In the years after the war, Tokyo was rebuilt, homes returned, factories reopened, culture revived, the economy grew, innovation flourished. But the city was rebuilt by people who had lived through the firestorm, people who had lost parents and children, people who carried memories of a night when the sky fell to the ground. Tokyo rose, but the land beneath it was made of the ashes of those who never returned. The firebombing of Tokyo delivered a message that transcends the war. When conflict reaches civilians, it stops being war. It becomes a human catastrophe. Tokyo showed the world that technology can outrun morality, industrial power can create destruction beyond comprehension. Modern warfare erases the boundary between frontline and home. Entire societies can be dismantled in hours. A researcher wrote, "Tokyo is not a lesson in victory. Tokyo is a lesson in the limits of humanity. It stands as a testament to what happens when war becomes total, and when fire becomes a tool of strategy instead of a force of nature." Closing, Tokyo lives, but it lives with its ghosts. Today, Tokyo is bright, modern, alive, filled with energy and ambition. But every street, every corner, every quiet park built over the old Shitamachi districts may stand above a place where someone fell on March 10th, 1945. And when the wind runs across the Sumida River, when the smoke from a bus drifts into the air, some elderly survivors still feel that a night long ago is returning. The night when Tokyo lost everything. Their memories live in silence. Their silence lives in the city. And the city, rebuilt from ashes, lives because they survived.